Our next keynote speaker is previous Children's Commissioner for England and has worked incredibly closely with the NYA over a number of years in that position, particularly around our Out of Sight report, where we analyse the numbers of young people affected by the pandemic and what the response needed to look like. Since leaving the role as the Children's Commissioner for England, Anne has gone on to develop a new initiative, a national commission looking at the impact on young lives. And so I'm really pleased to introduce Anne for her keynote speech to our audience. Thanks, Anne.
Trying to use two screens here. It's not going to go well, but it will. So thank you so much. And thank you, Lee, for that brilliant introduction as well. And I'm really pleased we just had this conversation for the last hour or so, because it was so important, a conversation. It's one that over, the years hasn't often enough been held, in my view, but it also had that real understanding of not only what the issues were, but also what some of the solutions are. And since I left the role of Children's Commissioner in the year, this is something that I really want to throw my weight behind. And I did that really because, of all the vulnerable children that I'd highlighted over those 5 or 6 years, and indeed before that, I tried to systematically look at which group of kids were falling out of which part of the system where. There was one group that I felt were the ones at greatest risk and furthest away from the kind of solution that I thought was needed, and there seemed to be recognition was needed. And that was this group of teenagers that I just got fed up with hearing people say, they were too complex, their needs were too complex, they were too expensive, it was too late to help them. There were some who said, we should recognize that some children can't be helped. Well, none of those fitted with my view of the world. I set up the Commission on Young Lives. It launched back in September. We're hosted and backed by the Oasis Charitable Trust that have done brilliant grassroots work for decades and funded by social finance and completely independent. And, we're going to be running for just over a year, well, actually a year now, and report constantly throughout that time. But we really want to do this. Our aim is to do this collaboratively. This isn't about us coming up with the same thing that everyone else has come up with. This is not about kind of drawing together some research and literature view and the like. What we want to do is really play our part in harnessing collective voices and also to show what those solutions can be. Because I think that although you've heard some brilliant examples of what's clearly working, and the VRUs are doing great work, and there's some great work across the whole system in different places, it's still the stuff you notice when it's great, rather than you expect it to be there and notice if it's not happening. And there's still not any sense, I don't think, across government in different departments, how departments can actually come together. That glue's not there nationally, and too often the glue's not there locally either. And I just wanted to share some of our thinking about what we're aiming to do, but also some of our early thoughts of what are the kind of things that need to be in place. And fair to say, no surprise given the content of the conference today, actual relationships, we believe, are at the heart of everything. And the relationships which too often are missing from those young people's lives are the youth work relationships, which are there for them, which bother with them, which notice them, understand them, and which are kind of there for them for the long game. So we think that's something that we really want to put an emphasis on, and really pleased to be able to support the NYA and their campaigns today. And I just wanted to start again, and we've heard some of those figures, but I wanted just to raise those figures again because they are big figures, and I think we should really be incensed, if you like, about the number of young people who are clearly living very vulnerable lives, really at risk of exploitation, of grooming, of getting involved in gangs and violence, and the criminal justice system as well. We know those are the kids that are falling between the gaps in the system and have really poor life chances in all likelihood once they reach adult life. This isn't something which is new through the pandemic, of course. Before the pandemic, research that my office undertook came to the conclusion there were about 120,000 young people who were highly vulnerable. These are the young people who are going regularly missing. They may be on the edge of care or in care. They are already identified as being part of gangs. You know, this is a number of different factors that are coming together, about 120,000, and that comes out about 1 in 25, if you want to get that down to how many we're talking about. And in some areas, that was down to about 1 in 8 at various parts in the country. So that was before the pandemic. What we know throughout the pandemic is that a lot of those vulnerabilities are likely to be heightened. The data generally on virtually everything during the pandemic hasn't yet been seen itself coming through. And anyway, it was difficult because it was such a disrupted period. But what we do know as well, it's about 100,000 young people that haven't returned to school since school opened. Now, it's a little bit foggy about why. Some might be about health concerns. These are the ones that aren't absent because of COVID. But the Centre for Social Justice said that they thought there were 97,000 children, largely young people, that hadn't returned to school in July. And looking at the attendance figures, we believe that number may have increased. We know that there's now around 80,000 plus children who are homeschooled, some because it's part of what their family wants, because it's something which is a positive choice, but many that will be now joining that homeschool group may not be for the best reasons, maybe because they're not comfortable in school, maybe because they aren't getting the support they need. And it's risen from about 50,000 before COVID. So that's a big leap up. Again, what these figures are, they kind of demand more investigation. They're kind of troubling and worrying in their own right, but actually they can't yet tell you what that means. And then the figure on children in need that came out last Thursday that Abby talked about, that showed that there were 12,700 young people in need who were there because of their assessment around gangs. We know that it was a number that increased by 4% of those children going into care because of gang-related issues in the year before COVID. And what we also know, and there's been, lots of TV reporters have been very interested in this over the year and a half, is that actually the pandemic dealt a really strong hand to those that want to exploit or groom young people. It meant that those young people were much more vulnerable, often outside the home, and those that were seeking to exploit them had much more sophisticated methods and more brutal methods to get at them. And one thing that I've been really struck by, which is just a terrible figure, is that when you talk to those that have really investigated how gangs work, what they say to me is that those that are in gangs that are looking to find those, the young people that they can exploit, they say they're always looking to fill a pipeline, and that pipeline's about 20% any time. So if you think any recruitment company always looking to find 20% of new staff coming in, this is what we're looking at here. And it's that relentless determination to find them, looking at those young people who are going home alone, looking at those that are miserable night after night. Actually, I want there to be people there looking for those young people with the same determination, but to positively inspire them, to offer them opportunities. And the other reason that I really wanted to do this was that during my time as Children's Commissioner, I would go into lots of youth offending institutes and custody with young people. And, I'd say to them, how did it come to this? Tell me about your journey. And first one, they told me difficulties at home. Got into difficulties in school. There was a point of going missing, usually living with grandparents, some point of exploitation, et cetera, et cetera. The second was the same. The third was the same. every time I've spoken to someone, give or take, about 5%, actually, it's almost like a blueprint. So we know that. And my argument is that we now have to do something about it. So we need to understand when young people become more marginalized and fall through those gaps in services. The National Crime Agency said to me, it's like there's a missing piece of the jigsaw around kids actually that need help. There's the police doing their bit, schools doing their bit, social services doing their bit. You might have a view on whether that might be more or less or whatever, but all of those agents say, yes, it's a problem for us, but I don't think we can do any more. But what that means is right in the middle of that, there's that young person there who is having a really difficult time, a really difficult experience, and are very vulnerable. And what they don't have is they don't have people around them enough or often enough or in the right way. And that's where I think the opportunity really has to be, and the necessity for youth workers to really be able to intervene. And it is that centrality of relationships, which, I don't need to tell anyone here about, but we do really need to push this point for those that are making decisions around investment for young people's lives. It is that centrality of the relationship. And I'm really interested in looking at about how we can represent that necessity of having an army of people to work with young people to those that actually can invest in this and can actually reform and shape that system. I'm really struck by, you've got youth workers working in local authorities, youth workers working in local charities, you've got uniform groups, all doing really great things, but often not able to reach their own potential because of the system around them. But if you also look, you've got so many great pastoral care workers in schools. Oasis School down in Waterloo has 9 youth workers in there that work with young people who are showing signs of difficulties in schools to prevent them getting into a position where, they might have to come out of that school. They have a farm there. They go work with the kids in the farm. They take them away. But a lot of schools will say, well, that's great, but we just don't have enough of those pastoral care staff. I think we should have more. And those that I see often describe themselves as having a youth work background. And then we've got those that are working in youth offending teams, 5,500 of them. Again, often doing really, really great stuff. But I think they have so much more in common as well with so many who are working in community-based youth work as well. So I think there's an opportunity here to think creatively. And I back the NYA campaign to have, the equivalent of 2 youth workers around schools. I'd actually like that to be about 20. But, you get the point. I think we should be bold about this. And I think we should really be quite demanding because people aren't incensed enough. And I think we have to be incensed as well to get there. So you've heard really excellent examples of, the kind of support young people will respond to, that kind of real inspiration, that diversion, that disruption, really reclaiming some of the areas where young people are falling into difficult experiences, both geographically, but also in their relationships. And often people will compare what that might mean to some of the workers that were working with the Troubled Families Programme, now called the Supporting Families Programme, where, you've got a key worker working with a family over days and weeks, there for them, not to judge them, not to make sure that they're attending, well, they weren't actually doing that, but, really there to be on their side, to stick with them, but in a bit of a deal, a deal that said, we can really help you, but let's do this together. And I think there's something there that we can draw on in terms of the kind of system and support we need to see for young people. But what they also said with those workers is that, there's so many people buzzing around those families' lives, probably about 18 professionals at any one time. Actually, the Troubled Families workers spent 80% of their time kind of coordinating all of these different professionals in their lives. Actually, we need those individuals to be able to work with those families and for there to be a common approach that is coordinated in terms of being able to support the family to succeed. So where to start? I'd also say I think we need specialist foster care for those children in care, because one thing that we do know as well, as well as all those other stats in terms of increased likelihood of being involved in violence and gangs and the like, children in care are much more prevalent in there. So specialist foster carers and actually remand foster carers for those that are in custody. So where to start? So we'll be investigating as part of our year of research, collaboration, discussions and others, what that workforce looks like, and would really, really love to work both with NYA and to anyone here who feels passionate about that and really can help add to that conversation. Again, I'd love to see 20,000 in schools or more, but also I think we need to look at how we really get that kind of momentum behind a growth in the workforce. Even when there is money that's put into an area of provision, often people will say, well, that's okay, but actually we haven't got the workforce. It takes years and years and years. So I think, again, we need to look creatively at how we grow, how we supercharge that workforce to be able to get to the point where we have enough people working with those young people themselves. And then I think we need to look at the system, many of the things that you've just heard, critically look at the system and see where those kids fall out. You know, we do have a system around exclusion in schools, which, you know, the major debate is around exclusion and behaviour, where actually all of those points, it's never going well when a child gets to the point of exclusion. So let's look at that as a trigger point for intervention. And we know that it's likely to get much, much worse on the second exclusion. So let's do as much as we can. If there has to be a first exclusion, which I don't really accept there has to be most of the time, but to prevent a second, let's look at how we can embrace youth work principles and approaches within all of the different agencies that are working with young people. And let's look at identifying those children who need help at the earliest time, you know, really in the first few months and years of life. Because if you've got a workforce there working with children when they're very young, then they can identify those needs and start responding to them. They're much likely to come up as they much more extreme issues later on. And just really a comment on the whole thing about how we get the system changed. I do think we need to be more ambitious for young people that are experiencing some of these most traumatic events in their lives. And that goes from every aspect of their lives, from the support for families, but also within schools, and the kind of support we give them to enable them to develop skills and build their life skills and the like. But it's a matter of fact that actually over the last 10 years, there has been a 70% reduction in funds for early intervention. And that means Sure Start Children's Centres, and it also means youth work as well. So there has been a big drop off in the investment there, which means that we're all starting from quite a low base, which is why I think really we have to get it back onto a different footing. It has to be a cross-government plan, and it has to have that level of investment behind them and that understanding. So yes, mental health support is needed, but in the right way as well. So what we're going to be doing with the Commission is we'll be working locally in a number of areas to look at drawing up the kind of plan that would work locally, working in different themes, looking at children in care, families, school inclusion and the like, also looking at girls and gangs, which I absolutely agree is not getting the attention it needs. And we'll be reporting on a monthly basis on all of those different themes, but also we'll be presenting a plan which will look locally and also nationally at what a system that can provide that solution and support looks like. And we're gathering evidence, we're taking evidence at the moment, so we'd love to hear from any of you. That is on our website at the moment. But I agree with Kim that this, we shouldn't keep hold of this. We should be generous in thinking that the impact of this. It's not just going to be about young people. It's not just going to be about those families. Actually, as a country, if we want to level up, we do need to start with children and young people themselves. So we need to start describing this, yes, in social policy terms, but also in hard economic impact terms too. There's a loss of talent here. There's a loss of life chances. And there's also a heavy call on the public purse if we don't do anything. So for me, change has to be absolutely front and center. And we'd love to work with you over this period to really make that difference.
Colleagues, there's a bit of time for a few questions for Anne, if anybody wants to see you. Scrambling for microphones. 1 second. Jonathan, Stuart, come.
Thanks. Anne, really enjoyed that, and I think it's really powerful that you're looking at relationships between young people and young people. But also relationships between workers and young people. I'm not sure if your commission is looking at it, but is there anything there around relationships, professional relationships between youth workers? At this moment in time, there's a real difficulty in retaining staff. So to get to a position where we want 20,000 when we can't retain the current ones that we've got, I think that there's something there possibly to look at around communities of practice, because it's great being a youth worker in a school, but if you haven't got other youth workers to converse with, then it can be quite frustrating.
We'll take a couple others and then we'll.
It's just an extension actually of that question, because I was thinking about, you said the ultimate goal, 20 youth workers in each school, and the earlier ask for 10,000, but as well as making sure there's good communities and support networks for youth workers. Also, how do we make sure that youth work is a well-paid industry with good progression and support for the staff members? Because I think there's always, and in the charity sector and across voluntary networks, is a lot of reliance on the goodwill of the person, and I think that's always going to be the primary need for youth workers. But how do we make it a successful industry so we can make sure we recruit into it?
Okay, anyone else?
And I just wondered what you made of the, I'm sorry, I'm from The Guardian, what you made of the of the budget in relation to youth work, given what you've just been saying about your desire to see a big increase in youth workers, particularly those in school. Very interested by you making that point about school youth workers as well, because from my understanding, a lot of them are completely overwhelmed since the start of term with the number of problems that they're seeing.
And just to give you an idea on the number, there's an alternative provision I've been to a couple of times on the Isle of Dogs. They have 50 young people there, and they have, I'm going to get my maths wrong now, I think they have 8 youth workers there, or pastoral care workers, let's say, call it there. But with the youth work starting point, they call it, which is why I think this, we should bring all these different parts of the army together, if you like. And they were working on 1 to 12, so maybe it's not that many. They said they needed to work on a 1 to 6 basis. Now that's not every school, it's alternative provision. It's the place actually kids go when they've been kind of thrown out of every other alternative provision. But you can see where those kind of numbers start to come from, if you like. So with the budget, I will get on to see the others. With the budget, I mean, my sense overall is that I'm pleased to see where there are some pots of money that have children and young people and families next to it. There have been budgets where there haven't been. So, I always think it's best not to be churlish on those things, but it's not reaching the scale needed to really turn the corner on this, epidemic that we're seeing of children who are at risk of violence and exploitation. And, you know, my theory is that we become almost, it becomes the norm. So in London, if you see someone running down the street with a machete, it's kind of, you know, there is that moment where everyone goes, horror, gosh, and then everyone goes back inside and, you know, life carries on. And I think that we've got a particular issue here which needs particular attention. It will cost a lot of money, both in the short and the long term, to do nothing. So actually, all the benefits there, I believe, are in terms of having a bold plan, which actually invests in young people and invests in them now. Yeah, I think that there's some stepping stones that could be built on in the budget, but we need to say those pretty fast. And part of this is about bringing together all of those different parts of the government that actually is doing bits and bobs in these areas and making them meaningful and leading from the front as well. And I think, you know, I was very pleased the Prime Minister wants to bite the head off county lines. And I think, you know, I'd want him to use every bit of the engine of government to do that, and then look at what's needed on top of that. In terms of you probably know much more in terms of youth work to be able to answer some of these. My sense is, I suppose what I'm, yeah, I mean, I can see how it's difficult for workers, those that are trying to build a team when, you know, people are leaving, and also it's easier if you're in a school and that kind of structure. However, I suppose and it's easy for me to say in a sense, isn't it? But, you know, what I'm talking about having a accepted and recognised profession here, which is working alongside other professionals in a very collaborative and equal way in terms of young people's lives. And the reason I feel more confident about that, I think, than probably even before the pandemic, is that, you know, people aren't saying that's needed. I mean, everyone in this room is, but, you know, in various parts of decision makers, because they've decided it's a good thing on its own. It's because actually we know that youth workers are the one that can resolve some of these issues and work so positively with these young people to be able to get them to re-engage with school, to be able to support them, to be able to help them succeed. So I suppose I'm doing a bit of a leap to where I would like it to be in some stepping stones, but I understand the difficulty that we have.
I mean, I would say we've been in a race to the bottom for the last decade, where you're you're taking out professional services from statutory end and you're putting money into the voluntary sector, but you're giving them the smallest amount possible. So the salaries have dropped because they're trying to employ as many people as possible to do the job without the resource to achieve it. And the net result of that is people are going, oh, this isn't a career that's going to I can make a living from, hasn't got progression routes. And ultimately, over the last 10 years, we've eroded that. I guess there are investments starting to make a move on that. And there is, you know, we've been putting funding into various things, working with government to do so, but it's going to take 10 years almost to reverse the 10-year decline. And I'm not sure we've yet started to climb back out. We'll see. Anne?
No, I know you're over lunch, aren't you? So, I mean, there are other ways of doing it, aren't there, as well? So, you know, in a lot of Scandinavian countries, they have school days where you have teaching day, parts of the day, and then you have more kind of additional extracurricular activities, play, all those kind of things. And I just think it's time to look at some of those things, not as some kind of soft option actually, but actually as the way forward to be able to help young people to flourish in the way we'd all want them to.
Super, thank you very much. Anne, thank you so much for your input. It's been, I'm sure everyone's very fascinated. We show our appreciation in the usual way. That'd be great.